Hi there. Thank you for staying this late. I'm between you and the cocktails, so I'll try to be quick but interesting at the same time. I'm here to talk today about the Node Foundation. How many of you guys are users of Node? So about half. That's pretty good. All right. And some of this you're going to know about. There's also a little history lesson in here, because I like to remind people of where we came from. And I've been talking about open source for almost 20 years now, and I love it that we won to the extent that we have won. But I notice that if we don't stay vigilant and keep reminding people, especially new people, what's happening, we run the risk of losing it again, because it's a slippery slope. It's really easy to give up little concessions along the way that add up to the end of open source. So we'll talk about that a little bit too. All right, so June 2014, I was at FooCamp, which is a conference that Tim O'Reilly gives. It's an invitational conference in his backyard, and we literally pitch tents. I was kind of minding my own business in there. And this guy walks up to me. This is Michael Rogers, and he has been caring about JavaScript and also Node.js for quite a long time now. And he wanted to understand about copyright, because there had just been a change in the Node community. The trademark holder of Node had unilaterally decided to stop aggregating copyright. That means you didn't have to sign the little piece of paper anymore to give a contribution. And he wanted to understand what the effect of that was going to be and exactly what was going to happen next. And as it happened, I did know a little bit about Node. And the reason that I knew about Node at all was because I had gone to work a few months earlier for PayPal. So PayPal switched to Node in 2013, and they did this in a very calculated way. Some of you may have seen this gentleman talking about the switch, because he was kind of the architect of it. This is Bill Scott. He came from Netflix to PayPal with the goal of changing the way that PayPal front-ended. And he wanted to use this tool Node. And at the time, in 2013, PayPal was still front-ending in Java. And he's from Texas. He's a really sweet guy. And when the people at PayPal that were nervous about change asked him, what he was doing, he said, "I'm just prototyping. You don't have to worry. I'm just prototyping." And he knew that eventually this was going to end up being production code, but he also knew that they weren't ready to hear it yet. He waited until the Java developers were begging to be allowed to use Node, because two people, very small team, were able to get more done than like a team of 25 people trying to front end in Java. And they were losing the race, so they wanted to switch to the other side. So anyway, this is why I knew about it. He called me up and said, "I would like you to talk to us about how to make our contribution to the open source world around Node really successful." And that was the first. You going to do this for me? What are you doing? Oh, that's terrible. Apple. All right. So in 2014, they released Kraken, the beginning of the year. I had helped them with all the details of it to make it have the best possible landing. And I did this as a consultant, and lo and behold, it was really successful. And they listened to me carefully, and they did everything I told them to do. So then they said, "Well, you should be an employee." And I said, "Well, why would I do that? I'm a consultant. I like my life." And they basically made it so I couldn't say no. One of the things they did was they let me keep my consultancy open. So I have a lot of interesting conversations with people. But back then, when they released Kraken, which is a framework that sits on top of Express and makes Node run at PayPal scale, which is lots and lots of transactions, especially at Christmas time, And it's kind of a bumper area so that our developers have a lot of choice. They can pick whatever modules they think they want to use, but they can't get in too much trouble because this framework is making sure that they can run at scale. These are the companies that were using Node in everyday work in 2014 when we released Kraken. And this is from an article that Joyent, who's the trademark holder, was put out. And it was an impressive list. I was really surprised. Wow. All right, we'll just keep doing this periodically until it goes away. But also they had a passionate ecosystem, I noticed. I noticed that because somebody started a campaign of people from the ecosystem introducing themselves to me as I was joining PayPal, because they were hoping that we would do more for Node, that we would be more interested in Node, and we'd keep lifting it. Michael had already explained to me that there was a problem, and so I knew that something was coming, so I started a conversation with this guy. This is his name is Stuart Hammond. Sorry. It's because the network is out, so it won't let me actually quit out of that piece of software. Do what? Ignore. Thank you. I did try that once before, just so you know. So this is the guy, Scott Hammond, who is the CEO of Joyent, who owned the trademark for Node, and who had he's not the one who made the decision. But I started talking to him because he's the one who would have to make a decision if something was going to change for Node. And I spent a lot of time talking to him, and I want to say he's a smart man. He's very interested in getting it right. He's passionate about doing the right things for the technology, but also getting some credit for what he thinks was reasonable stewardship, even though he wasn't there. He's a brand new CEO. But he likes the idea that his company does well in addition to Node doing well. And I wanted to help him out. I really did. So over time, we got there. But I got to say that it's really hard to learn open source if you're from a proprietary point of view. He's had various things that he didn't understand over the time that we've been talking, and he gets through them, and then another one comes up, and it's really interesting because it mirrors my consulting world when I had to explain it to clients. So, for instance, one day he was very upset because one of the major vendors in the Node space was wrapping the open source code with some proprietary code and putting it out as a product. And he didn't think that should be possible because it was open source. And I said, permissive licensing, dude, that's the name of the game. That's what you want. You want that adoption. He's like, really? Why do I want this? Endless problems like that. And the main one was, and it took me a long time to realize, his focus is on end users, not on the developers that are creating the software. Because in his business life, he has to focus on the end user, and he thinks of the developers, his employees, as cogs in a wheel, like a lot of employers. But of course, open source turns that on its head. Those core developers are the whole deal. They're everything. And the users, it's nice if the users can use the software, but it's really about those core developers. So this was a little different for him. But we slogged through it. Now we're going to have time out for a story. So remember that I was talking to Scott Hammond. We're going to talk about a completely different thing that happened 12 years earlier, okay? So once upon a time, there was this technology called Java. You guys all know Java? How many of you have coded in Java? Yeah? Okay, good. So Java was not open source. Java had not been open source ever, and it was problematic. Until this guy made a statement at a conference in Tokyo. He said that Java would be open source the next year, and then he quit. I don't want to comment on Mr. Barrett's and why he would do that, but shortly after that, I got tapped on the shoulder in a sushi bar in Cupertino, across from Apple's headquarters, and asked if I wanted to open source Java. And I called my husband up, like I do, and I said, do I want to open source Java? He said, yes, you do. Yes, you want to do that. And I said, why do I want to do that? And he said, because you're really stubborn, and you probably get it right eventually. All right, so when Mr. Barrett's left, there was a power vacuum. This is a Dyson vacuum, but what I'm talking about is there was no leadership in the company. And the people who invested in Java were really upset. So you may know that for the 10 first years of Java, the biggest companies in the Valley all gave $1 million apiece every year so that Java would be developed. Sun figured out that they could create partnerships with all these companies because everybody wanted this thing. The idea of write once, run anywhere was really compelling. So everybody wanted a piece of that. So they showed up. There they are, the people who'd been paying money in, and they said, Sun, you don't have your act together. You need to give us this technology we've been paying for all this time. I mean, give it to us. You shouldn't be running this anymore. You're bad stewards, right? And this was some of the biggest companies. They're household names. You know most of them. And, what to do, right? Well, this guy, and this is the best picture I could find of him. This is John Canegard, and he is the unsung hero of open source Java. He's the one who was running JavaSoft, the division. He said, you know what? It's true that we have a power vacuum, and it's true that they've been putting money in, but they're the wrong people to run Java going forward. Java should be run by everybody who has a stake in the game. And so really what was happening was he kind of put on his colored glasses, his rose-colored glasses, and he came up with this idea of this sort of commune that they were going to start around Java, and it was going to be called the Java Community Process. Now, he's the one who had pushed Tomcat. So Tomcat came from a very senior person who, saw the opportunity and put money together to build a team to create Tomcat, which was the servlet API put into open source out of Java. And they did it because Microsoft was going to otherwise own the web, and they needed to drive adoption, and this was the fastest way to drive adoption for an alternative. So that's why we have Tomcat. So he was kind of a visionary about open source from the beginning. And then we started the Java community process. He asked me to get Apache involved. And I did. I've been an Apache member for a long time. I told them, this is an opportunity because you guys care about Java. I don't know how much of a hassle it's going to be. I'll just warn you, you're going to be the only ones that are really pushing for open source. But, Canegard wants this to happen. And they said, okay, we'll do it. So then, and here we are again, all right, you think that if I do, I can't do that. And I can't do that either, apparently. Apple. I don't know what to do with this now. I think we're going to have to escape out of it and try do this. All right. I think that's really still not going to work, but we'll try it. All right. So they were happy together. Tomcat was doing really well. And then it came time to renegotiate the document that bound all of the members of the Java community together. And this includes IBM and Oracle and Motorola and Apple and God and everybody, Microsoft even, everybody's in there, right? They wanted to renegotiate it because there were some bugs in the process they found. And so they're doing this, and the guy from Apache is sitting through these long calls every week, 2 hours of his time, 3 hours of his time. And he's a volunteer, but he's in there. He's working hard to get that done. And one time, he asks the lawyer on a call, would it be possible to do Tomcat under this new agreement? Because that was what was happening at Apache. All they cared about was, are we going to be in violation of this future agreement? And the answer was, Tomcat wouldn't be possible. Even Sun could not do open source Java under the agreement that they were writing. And, you know, Apache, they got mad. They got really mad. Like 200 very influential engineers, the members at Apache, were saying, well, we can't stay in this organization because it's not going to be open source anymore, and that's what we're here for. So they announced that they were going to leave. And that could not happen. So they negotiated a compromise. And these guys are the ones who did it. The one on this side is Rob Jingle. He was the CTO of JavaSoft. And the one on this side is Jason Hunter. And he actually lives in Singapore now. So I had dinner with him a couple nights ago. But he's the one who was on the phone for these long, long calls. And they negotiated something that they called the Apache Compromise. It basically said that Apache should be allowed, because they're good guys and they care about compatibility and they have the right goals for Java, they're not trying to break it, they should be allowed to re-implement the Java specs in open source as long as they do it compatibly. This was a huge piece of news in 2003 because I had been working since 1999 to try to open source Java, and mostly I got this from the people that wrote Java. So this was a really big change. So then I convinced Rob that it needed to be something that was publicly known, because transparency, open source, and Java 1 was going to happen like the next week. So could we just walk on stage and have a conversation, maybe between keynotes, because Rob was going to be the MC of Java 1 that year. And so there was no way to get a real announcement out because PR, it takes months to do those announcements. But also, they didn't like the idea of this. They were part of this, you know. They didn't want to see Java open sourced. And so, but they didn't want to fire me either. They just sort of left me around. So now you have to think about this. 6 in the morning, we're walking across Howard Street to go into the rehearsal for the keynote. This is Jason and me. Now, it's really early in the morning for Jason. He's a programmer. How many of you like to get up at 6 in the morning? Yeah, like almost nobody, right? So he's grumpy. And we're walking across the street, across this zebra crossing. And we run, and see, I told you it was going to do it. Sorry. Oh, I made it go away, though. Okay, and so we run into this lady. She was in charge of brand. Her name was Tracy Stout. And she and I are walking across the crosswalk, and she says, "What are you doing here, Denise?" And I said, "Oh, I have my friend Jason Hunter. He's going to be on stage really briefly between 2 of the keynotes. He's from Apache. He's going to talk about open source Java." And she says, "That's nice." And then we get down the stairs. She goes into the green room where Scott McNeely, who has a keynote that day, is not happy with his speech. And you see how in this picture Scott is holding like a little stack of cards? That's how he did his keynotes. They were written out very, very specifically, and then he'd rip one off and throw it over his shoulder sometimes in the middle of the keynote, you know, right? So he's backstage, he doesn't like his talk, and he is throwing cards, and he's yelling, and everybody's terrified. And Tracy comes in and she says, he's upset because he doesn't think there's anything newsworthy in his keynote. He says, "I'm the CEO. There should be something interesting in this talk. Why can't I get something interesting to say?" And Tracy says, "I just ran into Denise in the crosswalk, and she's got this guy from Apache and open source Java." And he says, "Bring me that kid." Okay? So we're in the front of the house. Jason has his microphone on. We're standing there, and he's all gaga because James Gosling is standing there, and he's talking to him. There's nobody there in the audience at all. It's 6 in the morning, right? And so Scott gets a hold of Jason, and the next thing I know, Jason is the featured event at Scott's keynote. And they stand on stage and they talk about open source Java in front of not only the 28,000 people that are physically in the room, because there literally are that many people that fit in Moscone, but also the millions of people that are watching this stream. This is the moment that it really happened, that we knew there would be Open Java. But it took all of those coincidences and all of that sort of clandestine belief to make it happen. So it was happy news for everybody that was there. By the way, I had a really, really hard time finding a good picture of the inside of Moscone. I will say it was not happy news for everyone. So you see how you're sitting in the front row here? That's what happens when you are babysitting a keynote at Java 1. They make you sit in the front row. And behind you are all the people that work at Sun. And I mean every VP, every director, and they're all angry because we got this news out the door without any approval, any PR, anything. And of course, as soon as the keynote's over, every reporter wants to know. They're all really interested in this big change. So what was the story? What was this story about? This is how much work it used to be to open source stuff. It was really hard. And it took like acts of God to get these companies to give up their IP. These days, everybody gets it. I mean, Node is worth not quite as much as Java, but it's getting the momentum of how fast Node is becoming the way you do a front end, and even the way you do sort of the middleware and parts of the back end. It's amazing how fast it's happening. And a lot of that is being driven by the fact that it's open source. Sun spent incredible amounts of money getting every single kid in the CS departments of the world to learn Java. And I don't know that they're teaching Node. I think they're still teaching Java because they're sort of stuck in the old way of doing things. But Node is available for everybody to use and learn. And it really is becoming the tool of choice. So I just say the rest is history. Meanwhile, now we're going to come back into the present. Back at Node, we set up an advisory board as soon as Scott Hammond was comfortable enough to do that. And it was all the stakeholders that were agitating for change, including some really, really big companies. And we met publicly. We met every month. We, slowly but surely were starting to talk about what should happen. Not everybody loves process, however, and a lot of the key engineers that were working on Node in the technical committee got really bored, and they ended up famously creating a community fork, IOJS. And this turned out to be a really valuable thing that they did. So they spent a lot of energy on how they wanted to work together in the future, how things needed to change for them to feel comfortable. And they documented that stuff really well. Michael Rogers, who you saw the picture of earlier, was kind of in the middle of making sure that documentation was clean and reasonable, and there were good, well thought out plans for how things were going to change and move forward. Totally valuable work, and honestly, Node Foundation wouldn't exist without that work today. So we got them started talking to the Linux Foundation. That turned out to be the best partner for Scott, for Joyent, because they really talk in business terms. A lot of their thrust is about earning money for the technology so that it can go forward. And so that's why we went with them. We had a panel at Node Summit where we first talked about the likelihood that this was going to happen, really for real, in June. And the guy on this side here, that's Jim Zemlin, who runs the Linux Foundation. So that was a group of interested parties, including, Scott Hammond is in the middle there, talking about the desire to create a foundation and the hope that IOJS would come back into the fold. Now, there haven't been that many forks that have healed in the history of open source, just a handful, maybe like less than 5 total. And the biggest one was Perl, and that was almost 25, 30 years ago now. So I was really excited to be involved in fixing this one. And eventually we got chartered, in August, and that was a really, really big deal. IOJS said that they would come back if we did it properly. This is where we are now with sponsoring members. It's a lot of big companies and a lot of small companies that are involved in the Node community. And this is a pay-to-play board. That means all these people are paying money to have a seat somewhere on the table. That, to me, is a bug in open source. I honestly think that pay-to-play is the wrong way to go, because think about it. Open source is people. I am involved in Node, but because I have a seat that was paid for by my company, if I were to leave PayPal, I would also be walking away from that seat. And that's not how open source works. Open source is about people becoming passionate about technology and sticking it out regardless of where they sit. You know, when I left Sun, I was sitting on the OSI board, the Open Source Initiative board, and we had just changed presidents from the guy who had done it for a long time, you guys probably know Eric Raymond, to Michael Tiemann, who worked for Red Hat. And I got a memo from Jonathan Schwartz that said, "I'm uncomfortable with Red Hat holding this seat. Why didn't you take it?" Now, I had given notice at Sun. I was just working out my, the weeks until I changed and went off to work for Intel. And so I wrote back to him, I said, well, first of all, Jonathan, you don't really have a seat on the board. I have a seat on the board. I happen to work for you. But I actually gave notice, 3 weeks ago, and don't they tell you anything? And I'm not going to be here much longer, and then Sun won't have any representatives on OSI board because I'm going to go work for Intel, so then Intel will have one. So trying to explain to him how that goes. They're used to pay to play. They're used to a different kind of arrangement, and they think of resources, and when I say they, I mean corporations, think of resources as fungible. So remember I talked about how Scott was thinking about the users but not the engineers? Even a company like Sun that's totally organized around engineering still thinks of the engineers as kind of cogs in a big machine. And we can tell you where to work, and we can tell you where to work after that. We can put you on an open source project and get you all spun up, and then decide that it's not a good investment and pull you off of it, and you should leave gracefully. That's not open source. Open source is like hell, I'm going to leave. I've got stuff to do here. I'm interested in this project. That's open source. And I'm taking my seat with me when I leave because I'm the one doing the work, not you. So I think it's important that we remember that. If you work for a company that allows you to work on open source and they expect to be able to tell you when to stop, you might want to find another company. Do really good work on that project. It shouldn't be too hard. Okay. Come on. Oh, again. All right, there we go. So, Node has a technical steering committee. The board does not tell them what to do. The technical decisions are handled by the steering committee. This is in the bylaws. This is a condition of IOJS coming back, and it's the way open source projects should be run because they're in it because they care, not because they paid. So this is one modification that we're making to try to get to better open source behavior. Their mission is a really good mission. We exist as a board, as a foundation, to promote through open development and transparency the furthering of Node.js. That is our mission. It's pretty straightforward. We have some working agreements, like the one I mentioned before, where the technical steering committee does not get interference from the board. The board works on fiduciary things like, is the trademark being serviced? Is there enough money? Do we need something in the community? Like, is there some missing thing that nobody's picking up? Should we fund that? Those kinds of things. But we do not tell them what to do. The community is rich. They're really, really enthusiastic. They're very diverse, extremely diverse. One of the big things is although it's a North American foundation, it's not a North American project. It's a global project, which is what I'm doing here and why I will be doing a lot of Node conferences in the next year around the world, because it's really important to get the message out. We really are trying to not make it a North American thing. We're hoping to create an effective umbrella in the same way that Apache is an umbrella for projects. We're working now on specifying exactly what our umbrella attracts. Like, we don't want every project in the world, but we do have some key projects that we think need a better home that we depend on. And the first one that we're probably going to look at is libuv, because we need it for IOJS Node. And it's down to 2 maintainers. They're looking for a home. So that's probably the first one. I really, really like their logo too. Isn't it great? But we don't know for sure. This is I'm letting you in on a future possibility, but it's not actually a done deal yet. We are funding a user conference next month, and the idea of this conference is to create an environment where you could bring people who are making a decision about whether to use Node. So right now, if you go to a Node Conf, what you're going to meet is the crazy community, the wacky community. And they're very committed and lovely, and they don't necessarily sell well to future customers. You know, hi, I'm from Colonel Sanders. Right? I'm from Kentucky Fried Chicken. I need to know about this Node thing. Why does that person have a dress on? Isn't that a boy? You know, it doesn't work. So we're trying to make it clear that there's a technical community, and they need to meet, and they need to meet around the world. But there's also the potential user community. If this ecosystem is going to grow, there needs to be good places for people to come and, in a business-like way, feel comfortable about the promise of Node. So that's what this conference is. So we're calling for people that are interested in Node, that want to see the future of Node, and maybe want to see their career grow in the Node way, to consider getting involved with the foundation. Another change that we've made to the sort of standard Linux foundation thing is we have added 2 community-elected seats that will be from the community at large, so you don't have to pay to get one of these seats. You do have to be elected by the members, by your peers, and anyone can become a member of the Node Foundation. If you are a committer, you can do that for free. If you are not a committer, but you're just really interested, you can do it for not very much actual money, but it's low price because you're an individual. Because the goal is to just get people involved and hooked into Node. And so those 2 seats will be voting seats, and they'll come to every board meeting and have equal say to the rest of us in you know, board-like decisions, right? And I just had to put in a plug for Drupal 8, because you guys know Drupal 8, we've been waiting for 5 years for Drupal 8, and it came out yesterday on Dries Beytaert's birthday. And I also serve on this board, so yay, Drupal 8. How many of you know Drupal? Yay, go learn Drupal 8. Drupal 8 is going to be really exciting. And yes, I do in fact do both of these foundations. And I'm on about 4 different boards. And this is another thing you can do for open source, is get involved with this side of the business, because we always need good board members in every one of these foundations to try to help make good decisions that are going to create, you know, the open source effect for as many people as possible behind that technology. So if you're interested in board service, it's actually pretty great. And now, let's see, I have a glorious 11 minutes and 14 seconds for questions. And I will answer any question that you ask, probably truthfully.
Thanks. Hi.
Hi.
So my question is more of like, how does a company get involved with Node.js if they use it daily, they want to be a part of this, and like, we're the guys who have to sell it to our boss, like, we should be a part of this, not just use it every day, we should also be part of the foundation. How do we, a company, or how do we become a part of the foundation?
Perfect, I'm happy to tell you. So there's been a lot of research into how open source participation works, and basically it's a pyramid. So at Apache, where we have good statistics, we know that for every 100 users, there are 10 people who are willing to contribute. So about 1 in 10 actually come up with a contribution. And then for every 10 contributors, there's like 1 or maybe 2 trusted committers that come out of that. A trusted committership means you've taken the time to learn the code base that you're contributing to, and you can explain it to somebody else, and you can conduct code reviews and help mentor other people. So when you join as a user and you see something that you want to fix, your job is to figure out how to submit that patch, listen to the mentor, listen to the trusted committer, make whatever changes need to be made until it's acceptable to that trusted committer, believe that they have the project's best interest at heart. They're not just being mean to you. They're, like there's a real conversation you can have. And then learn enough about that process to gradually submit enough patches that you can do it and you know how to do it, and then you can explain it to somebody else. We talk a lot about that ramp and lowering the barrier to entry, getting people involved in any open source project, but especially Node. Coming up with a list of things that a beginner could do includes you're having to read the documentation. If it doesn't make sense to you and you figure out what the answer is, you could write it more clearly so the next person wouldn't stumble the same way you do. If somebody asks a question that you asked 2 months ago and you got an answer, you could answer this time because you know the answer now because you heard it 2 months ago. It's that layering on of generosity and honest human connection that makes open source so compelling for developers. Because you really can get your questions answered. You really can learn the new thing. You really can gain reputation. And once you have that public reputation, you can leverage that. Open source developers get paid 30% more globally. That's been confirmed in 3 different studies now. Why? Because we're better developers. Because we're willing to let our code be seen in public. That just automatically makes us better. In fact, any developer in the whole world, if they knew their code was going to be seen in public, I promise you they'd be more careful. They'd be better developers. It's just what happens. So, did that help? Yes. Good.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you so much for
welcome.
coming.
Was
all
it
the
worth
way,
it?
like short term too, actually. Thank you, Denise.